Good.
Good. How are you feeling about your second year of implementing Amplify?
I think I feel good. I feel better than I have. I think I'm still learning, but I'm getting the hang of it.
Well, you are so consistent with your timestamp and your pre-planning, and I think that's really, really good that you've been doing that with your students. You're such a great asset to our campus and to our students, and I wanted to commend you for that.
Thank you.
In our session today, I want us to strengthen our checking for understanding, and I think this is in this particular lesson because it does kind of have those gaps for it. So I know in our last observation, you have discovered that your student moves that you're witnessing, that it shows that student mastery and checking for understanding. So let's go ahead. I'm sorry. Once we're going to dive into the lesson and we're going to discuss what part we can strengthen from the checking of understanding. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay. We are going to be using the 3 to 5 integrated strand lesson plan internalization document that from Amplify to discuss the components of this lesson. Okay. What is the objective of this lesson?
So the objective is going to be that it's actually 4 different takes. So students are going to be citing details from the text when explaining what Jim learns about Long John Silver and when making inferences about Silver's intentions for the voyage. So I wrote it on top, but they'll be citing, explaining, and inferring in this lesson.
Good. In the previous lesson, the students have already brought meaning to descriptive words and phrases. Students also identified the figurative language. And those things, it's going to help them to create a memory of the plot and interesting characters. So that now the students are going to be connecting with the text in a more complex way, making inferences. And they're going to be, I like how you have already noted that they're going to be using the evidence from the text. I love how you've already internalized your lesson. That's awesome. In the activity, page 6.2, the students will be answering comprehension questions using the text evidence. These questions come from the text of chapter 4, as I see that you've already noted that. Good job. So when you are doing chapter 4, what is a good instructional move that you're going to be making to check that the students are comprehending the text of chapter 4 before they get to the activity page?
So what I am going to be doing, I'm going to be questioning students throughout our reading. I already have different questions that I'm going to ask, and that way I can make sure that they are comprehending what we're reading, and then they're going to be able to explain and infer.
Awesome. In the lesson at a glance and Amplify, they suggest, like you said, chapter 4 to be in small groups. How would you monitor their comprehension in small groups? I know that's such a big task when we have more than 3 to 4 students in our classrooms.
Yes. So what I wanted to do, I changed it up a little bit. So they are going to be getting into their small groups, but it will not be for the duration of the lesson. So what I changed, and you tell me if this sounds good, but what I did was we're going to be doing close reading as a class, and then we are going to just read questions 1 through 3. And so that's going to be about half of the chapter together. And then after, they're going to get into their small groups and they're going to do the questions. Then we'll come back and finish the story. And the way I am doing that is, I know you asked how are my groups going to be like or look like. I have 20 students, so I'm going to have 5 groups of 4. I'm going to have the 4 lowest students with me in my table. And I'm going to have the other students, the other 4 groups are going to be of four kids, and it's gonna be one low, two medium, and one high. And I use my data to be able to know who was who. And I also group them by behavior because I want to make sure that I'm able to work with my group. And I do have an answer sheet on my whiteboard so they can go back and refer to that while they're looking at their first three questions and make sure that their answer looks good, and that way they have no reason to come to my table.
Wow, I like how you have already reflected on the challenge that you have, been experiencing in the past. And I am excited to see you grow, and I'm excited to see your students grow in this new aspect of the closed reading.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Before we dig into the vocabulary that is tied into the formative assessment, I want to ask you, in the previous lesson, in lesson 5, the activity 5.1 of the take home contained a vocabulary activity.
Yes.
Are the students completing this at home? What's been working for you? Or are they doing this during like morning routines?
Yes.
What do you think is best?
So we are doing it in the morning during morning routines. I have several very low students, and I don't want to send this home and it not come back, or they not be able to do it at home and struggle. That's the last thing I want, for them to be at home by themselves and struggling with no one to help. So we are working on it in the morning.
Awesome. Back to lesson 6.
Yes.
Do you know where to locate the vocabulary list that students need for this lesson? It's located at the bottom of page 119.
Yes, I do have that.
Awesome. What resources, referring to that document, what resources are you planning to use to provide some background knowledge for these vocabulary words? It's an interesting chapter 4.
It is. So I actually even had to look up some of these words because as I went to page 120, I noticed that 3 words were multiple meaning words, and maroon was one of them. I did not know maroon was actually not just a color. Maroon is also a British firework.
Wow.
So I did look these up. What I'm gonna do is put them in my Google Slides. I'm gonna have the word, the meaning, and a picture of it. And this is also going to help my ELLs. And I'm gonna go over the vocabulary for this lesson. That way when they're reading, they don't get confused if I say, oh, maroon is also a firework, and we're reading and they're thinking, is she talking about a firework? What is she talking about? So I don't want to confuse them. First, I'm going to go over what it means, what the word means in the story. And then after the story, I'll let them know the multiple meanings. If one of my higher kids brings it up, I will let them know that I will say thank you for letting us know, and then I'll tell them that I want them to tell the class after our reading.
Good. I want to commend you for thinking about your diverse learners and that you're fostering all these tools and resources.
Thank you.
That's awesome. I'm amazing. And I also love how you're digging into the vocabulary words and you're putting in the work so that way you know how to teach those and make sure that you're addressing those misconceptions so that way they don't happen.
Yes,
That's
thank
awesome.
you.
I would also like to point out that using the vocabulary chart Amplify is a great resource. It helps us educators to understand the vocabulary words. And I like how you already have your tier 3, where those tier 3 were domain specific words.
Yes.
And the tier 2 were general academic words.
Yes.
Since the objective of this lesson is for students to make inference of the text using evidence from the text, and then they're comprehending the text, which is so critical. I am so appreciative that Amplify has pointed out that they even have the sayings and the phrasing for us. They've already identified those in the chart. How are you going to stamp this skill for your students to eliminate any misconceptions with the sayings and the unique phrases that they have in this story?
Yes, so what I have is that I'm going to go over the phrases first before we read it. So first we're going to go over vocabulary, then we're going to go over the phrases, and I'm going to first read the phrase as we're going to see it in our book, and then after that I am going to explain it to them and tell them what that means. That way they have that information with them. For example, in a real pickle, so I'm going to say the sentence, we're in a real pickle, and then I'm going to explain to them, and that means that they're in a lot of trouble. And this, because if our ELLs see that, they're going to say, am I inside a pickle? What is happening? So I did pre-think of that, and I added that to my Google Slides, and it'll be right after vocabulary.
Awesome. Thank you for planning ahead. Now we're going to dive into the lesson. And while we walk through this process, I want you to keep this in mind. We're going to really focus on checking for understanding and intentional places of the lesson. And the reason that I wanted to point that out was because at this point, it is a challenge. And so there's a huge part in the lesson where it says students are going to be independently reading chapter 4. And I know you talked about close reading. And so I want you to elaborate a little bit about that since chapter 4 is 9 pages.
Yes, so the way we will start, so chapter 4 starts on page 34 of the readers, and on our teacher guide it's 121. So we are going to be in whole group, and Amplify says small group, so I crossed that out. We're going to be in a whole group, and teacher will start with reading the title of the story, and I'm going to read the first paragraph. Then I'm going to have students join with me as we start on the second paragraph. Then I have the boys reading the third, girls the fourth, and then the teacher reads the fifth. And then when we're done reading, we have a question, and it says here to do it silently, but we're going to go ahead and do it whole group.
Wow, I like how you've already started to plan out your questions and the format. That's awesome. And so also with close reading, so this is a fictional text, and I also like how you have your questions written out, like who are the characters and what do you want them, what do they want to know, and what is getting in the way of what they want in the story, how is it going to be resolved, and what is the big idea of the text. And so that's awesome how you've chunked it, and you're constantly having the students going back into the text. They're actively interacting with the text. I do have one question.
Yes.
Is that how are you going to be have about where the students are going to have access to the vocabulary visuals?
Yes, so I have, all the students are going to have their readers with them, and I'm going to have all the vocabulary up on Google Slides, and they're going to come back during our reading because there's going to be certain areas where we need our vocabulary. So what I'll do is I'll show vocabulary first, then I'm going to show the phrases, and then I will let them know what chapter we're reading, the titles on our Google Slides, and then after that I'll have, as the vocabulary words come up, I already have those lined up in my Google Slides, and I also have the questions embedded with the sentence stems. That way they're seeing the question, they're hearing the question, and they have time to process, especially the ELLs. And there's a sentence stem so they know how to start their question or their answer.
That's good. I'm so glad that you're committed to our students, that they're building vocabulary and they're becoming good readers. Have you taken note of the, you have already, you're way ahead of the game, and you already addressed this, and where you have been thinking about our English language learners, that you're going to be supporting them, and also you're using the sentence stems that are along the light blue margins. As you continue to internalize your lesson, You could also write down the students' names that would benefit from those sentence stems. I've just found that we have such a distracting job, and when we're dealing with fire drills and all these things and different things that happen, it's just a real efficient way to ensure that we're supporting all of our learners. Also, I like how you have already addressed and you have written out your sentence frames that Amplify has supplied for us. And so, are you needing, I know you mentioned the readers, are you okay with materials? Do you need anything from us? Do you need any more readers?
Actually, my timer broke, so if I could get a new timer,
okay.
that would be great.
Okay.
And most of our markers have dried out, so if I could get some, I have enough that I can pull now, and I borrowed some for this lesson, but I would need some for the future.
Okay, absolutely. We'll get this over, and so that way we can get you a new timer, and then we get you some more expos.
Thank you.
Before ending our session together, I would like to ask you, did you see that in the teacher guide at the bottom on page 118, it says that fluency is an optional for this lesson? I know that we're very crunch on our 90-minute block, and I don't know if you have found, or maybe you have already found a creative approach on how to build fluency, because it often gets left out. And as we know by the latest research, about 8,000 high schoolers have dropped out, sadly due to not enough fluency practice at school. And so, do you have any creative ways on how we could share with other teachers?
Yeah, so for fluency practice, what we are doing is in the morning while we're having breakfast, students are able to, once they're done, they can read out loud. And I have an individual phone for each student. And this, I know it's usually used for students who are struggling, but I've noticed that it helps keep the noise down because they can hear themselves. So they're able to whisper read to themselves and they can hear what they sound like. So what I've done is once they're done having breakfast, they can pull their phone out of their desk because I have one-to-one. And thank you for buying those for me. That was so nice of you.
You're welcome.
So they're able to whisper and they read, and I've noticed that as I walk around, I really hear them being intentional with each word, and I hear them correcting themselves, and I hear my ELLs sounding out the words, and then sometimes I'll hear them go back and reread the sentence, and they already have the word with them, they already know what it means, and they keep reading. I found this to be useful, and like I said, I know that the phones are usually used if they're struggling, but even for my students that aren't struggling, I've noticed it's kept the noise down. You have 20 kids reading, and it's not so noisy. Everyone's able to focus and continue to read. And then I wanted to ask you, so my close reading, I do have like the teacher read, and I have it set up to how we're reading, and I noticed that Amplify does not have a question here, but I wanted to add a question since the picture was really nice. Do you think it's okay if I have time to add more questions, or does it become redundant?
No, absolutely. You can definitely use that visual, and then you can ask a question, and then you can even think about, because if you're worried about if you're asking too many questions, you can even pick out which question is going to be the best thing for your constructive responses. And so students can start practicing on how to write with the constructive responses.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
good,
you.
good. No, thank you.
And I did add to wait 8 seconds before I call on a student. I know that a lot of the ELLs, especially if they're in the beginning level, it'll take them a second to focus and figure out what is being asked. So I'm gonna go ahead and do 8 seconds. Then I'll call on someone whose hand is raised for this question.
And that's perfect. I love how you already intentionally thinking And that's not only going to help our ELLs, but that's going to help our entire classroom. And you're building in those good practices, because if we don't practice that, and so then that actually just starts a bad habit, and then students start to say, well, I'm not going to think anymore. We don't want to create a culture of passive thinking.
Yes.
So this is great. I'm so glad. Thank you for your commitment to our students. And the next time we meet, we're going to be analyzing lesson 13. We have an assessment coming up, a unit assessment coming up. So we'll be discussing our unit assessment. You don't have to write this down. I'll send out a calendar invite with the lesson that we're going to be digging into, and that we're going to be digging into our unit assessment. So if you have any questions during that time about the unit assessment, please come prepared with those questions so we can address those for you. And also on the calendar invite, I'm going to attach the agenda.
Okay.
And
can you tell me about the agenda now?
Sure. It's going to look a little bit similarly like this.
Okay.
And also think about like what type of celebrations that you want to share with us.
Okay.
And also we're going to dig into the lesson components, and then how they tie into the five key reading components. And then also, if you can bring any student exemplars with you from the checking understandings, because I know that is your passion, and you want to, we can see like the high, middle, and low kids and how they're doing.
Yes, that would be great, because actually for this lesson we have our assessment for this one is going to be the activity 6.2, and it does say for us to take it home, but I'm going to go ahead and do it in class, and I'm going to give students time to do it. We're going to do half on their own and half with a friend within their group, and this is going to help with the assessment that you need as well, since this is part of the questions that are being asked. So I did go ahead and write that down, and I'll have all those ready for you for our next meeting.
Okay. Do you need any assistance on the way you're going to group your kiddos?
I would like for you to look at it and just make sure that the way I set it up looks good, and just to make sure that they do look similar, and that they're working well. So if you want to come by, that would be great.
Thank you. I'm going to write a note of that, and then that way I will analyze the data for your class, and then we can see how we're going to group your kiddos for the, did you say 6.2 or?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Awesome.
Okay, and
Wonderful.
I think that is all I had on here too, because I wrote down some questions, but I think as we went on, you've answered them all. Let's see, and then, you asked me how I would call on students.
Yes.
So I do have popsicle sticks, cold call, raised hands, and I have those three that I will be using. You do ask me that.
Yes, and then how is that working out for you? Like especially like the cold call, how is that working out?
So the cold call, when I first started, I noticed some students were taken back, but now I see that they're all focused and ready and waiting in case I do it. So I feel like at this point it's working well in my class, and I feel like it's helped my students make sure that they're focused, they're on task, because they never know if I'll do a cold call. And I try not to do a lot, maybe once per lesson, but I do like to do it just to make sure that they're staying focused and they're staying on task.
Okay, and I think what's helping a lot is that you've created a culture in your classroom that just feels safe, and and I love to pop in and visit, and then so the kids, whenever I'm in there, the kids you are willing to share, and I love that you created a culture of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so this was really good. Thank you so much, and then I'll be sending you a calendar invite so that way we know what the agenda is going to be.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you so much.